Okay, so this is a brief discussion we're going to have on the Olympic lifts. I'm going to expand on this with the goal here is primarily to just look at the ways they get classified. So we're actually going to go a little bit further than what the textbook does. So, obviously you'll refer to your textbook for the muscles that get used and the actual phases and transitions. But what I'm going to do is talk here about how the Olympic lifts get categorized. So just kind of talk about like what differentiates a clean from a snatch, okay, and a push press from a push jerk. Just talk about some of the different things, and then even talk a little bit about some variations that you can use. Again, much like the classic squat, bench press, and deadlift, the classic power lifts, you have variations that you can use that can help build upon the classic variations of the lifts. Okay, so here we have the different Olympic lifts. So you have the snatch, the clean, the jerk, the push press. So essentially what you're doing is you're kind of looking at these lifts from the standpoints of where you're ending up with the barbell, and what your body's doing to get it there. So for instance, the snatch is when you take the barbell and it goes from its starting position to immediately overhead. Okay, so wherever the starting position would be, and wherever the starting position would be would go into how you would name the actual variation of the snatch that you're doing. The clean is where you take the barbell from the starting point and it ends up on the racked in front of the clavicles and shoulders. Okay, so it's where you kind of end up with the barbell kind of in that, what you'd classically think of even as like a front squat position. So essentially, when you watch Olympic weightlifters and when you watch the technique videos I post it, when you watch them do a clean and jerk, which is the actual Olympic competition where they clean the barbell, stand up, and they do the jerk, that actually when they're essentially doing a really heavy front squat when they're kind of coming out of the bottom portion of the clean. Okay, so the clean is take the barbell from the starting point to the clavicles and shoulders. The jerk and the push press, now these lifts look very similar. So if you've looked in the textbook at the technique for both of these lifts, they do look very similar. There is a difference between the two. So in both instances, you're taking the barbell, okay, from the front of the shoulders and pressing it overhead. So you're going to be doing that with both of these lifts. The difference is in the two of them is the transition phase that you're doing. So when you do the jerk, you actually catch the barbell. When the barbell's overhead, your knees are actually bent. Okay, so when you actually go press the barbell overhead, your knees are bent when your arms are fully extended. That's as opposed to the push press. Okay, so the push press exercise, when you press the barbell over your head, when the lift is complete and your arms are straight, your knees and hips are both extended. Okay, so the end of the push press, okay, when the barbells or the push jerk, when the barbell's overhead, your knees are bent. In the push press, they're straight. Okay, so that's the difference between those two. So they're very similar, just the only difference being now with the jerk, you'll actually still straighten the legs once you get the barbell pressed overhead, but when the barbell's initially up, your knees will be bent. Okay. We don't do a whole lot as far as, again, programming here, but just kind of like a general conversation piece. It's always recommended to use a lower repetition scheme with Olympic lifts. Now, that doesn't mean everybody does that necessarily. When we talk in class a little bit more, I'll kind of expand on that a little bit. But really, when you're doing these lifts, you're primarily doing them mostly for, mostly to stimulate the nervous system. So you want to make sure that you're doing high quality repetitions with this. So, doing really high repetition schemes with Olympic lifts, there might be somewhat of a conditioning effect from that, but it just gets, technique breakdowns and everything start to happen, so that could become problematic down the road. Okay, so here's here's where we kind of get into the naming here, okay? Because, probably a lot of you, if you've played sports, you've probably been told you're doing power cleans or you're doing hang cleans, okay? A lot of times those names aren't necessarily, they're not really complete and truly describing how you're doing the lift. So there really ends up being 3 parts. Like if you're really, listing your variations, there's really 3 parts to the names, okay? The first part involves what the position of the catch of the lift is. The second is the type of lift. And then the third is the starting position, okay? So let's start with that first part, the position of the catch. So there's 4 different names you could have for the first part. You can have squat, power, muscle, or split, okay? Squat, power, muscle, split, okay? So I'm going to go through each one of the parts of the name, and then I'll show you how that all applies, okay? So for the first part of the name of the lift, the position of the catch, squat, power, muscle, split. The second part is the type of lift, okay? That would either be a clean, a snatch, or a jerk, okay? A clean, a snatch, or a jerk for the second part of the lift. The third is the starting position. You're either doing it from the floor, from the hang position, or off of blocks, okay? With the barbell elevated. So I'm being off of blocks. So if you had an Olympic barbell with weights, so here, if this is your barbell, here's your weights. Okay, and you put 2 boxes underneath it, and that's where you're doing your boxes are a little uneven, but you get the point, right? Okay, so you'd be doing your lift off of the blocks. That's the start position. So how does this work? And this is one thing you're going to have to be able to do for me, okay? I'm going to give you like the parts, and you're going to have to tell me, what type of lift it is or how it would be named. So the first part is the position of the catch, okay? So if you're catching the barbell, okay, with knee flexion at 90 degrees or greater, that would be considered squat, okay? That would be considered squat, okay? If you're catching the barbell with knee bend less than 90 degrees, that would be power, okay? If you're catching the barbell with little to no knee bend, that's a muscle, okay? And then if you're catching the barbell with the feet staggered, that would be a split. Okay, so that tells you the first part of the lift. Okay, and we'll tie this all in together. So again, I'll repeat. So if it's squat, that means you're catching the barbell with the knees flexed to 90 degrees or greater. If it's power, the knees are flexed to less than 90 degrees. So they flex, but it's less than 90 degrees. If they have little to no bend in the knee, that's muscle. If the feet end up being staggered, that's split. Okay? That's the first part. The second part's just the type of lift. It's just what we talked about. The barbell goes from the start position to being racked in front of the shoulders and clavicle. That's a clean. The barbell goes directly from the starting position to overhead. That's a snatch. And then the jerk is pressing the barbell up overhead. Just once the elbows are extended, the knees are still bent until you end up, in the end, then straightening them out. Okay, that's the second part. Okay, and then the third is your starting position. So are you doing it off of the floor, meaning the barbell is just on the floor? Are you doing it from the hang, meaning that you pick the barbell up off the floor and you hold it before you initiate the lift? Or are you doing it off of blocks like we showed here? Okay, So you're either doing it off the floor, you're doing it from the hang position, or you're doing it off of blocks, okay? So for instance, okay, if I do a squat clean from the floor, think about what that would mean as far as the lift, okay? I do a squat clean from the floor. So what would that mean? So it would essentially mean that I'm taking the barbell from the floor, I'm doing a clean, and in the catch position, my knee bend is 90 degrees or greater. So typically what you see, and what you'll see in the videos of the actual Olympic weightlifters in competition, they essentially do a squat clean because, and part of that is because the weight they use is so heavy, they have to get underneath it as quickly as they can. So, and most Olympic weightlifters have very good hip and knee mobility. They have to in order to be Olympic weightlifters. But that would be what you're doing there, okay? So if I did a muscle snatch from the hang position, think about what that would mean. So think to yourself, if I said to you, a muscle snatch from the hang, what would that mean? So what that would essentially mean is I'm taking the barbell, I'm picking it up off the ground, and I'm holding it. So you're holding the barbell. You're taking the barbell from that position and going directly overhead and catching it with little to no knee bend, okay? So the muscle variations of these lifts require a little bit more upper body work to do a lot of times because you are going to use more of your upper body to kind of generate some of the movement because of the fact that you're not going to be dipping underneath the weight like you would in the instance of a squat lift. So there you'd be using a little bit more upper body, plus you're also going to be, again, you're still obviously going to use a lot of force at the hip, but you're really going to have to generate that momentum in order to get the barbell to the end position, okay? So again, the first part's the position of the catch. You're essentially looking at the lower body for that. You're looking to see how much hip and knee bend you have, and or seeing if you're going to be in a split position. So sometimes Olympic weightlifters will also catch in the split when they do their lifts. And all that means is just the feet end up being staggered when they do that. Okay? So this is something that I'm going to be, on your test, I'm going to be asking you this. I'm going to be saying, okay, if, I'll do it from both perspectives. I'll either go from the perspective of describing the lift and telling you to name it, or giving you the name of the lift and having you describe it for me. I'm going to make it that you do it kind of coming from either perspective. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of teach the Olympic lift. So there are some movements that you can utilize that can kind of break down some of the individual parts. I'm going to do a little video here just to kind of describe and even show some of these things. And there's some other videos that I have that I could show you in class. But these are just some examples because, again, these lifts, particularly the clean and the snatch, have a lot of components to it, and the technique's really important. So a lot of times you might have to break down some of the individual movements. So if you look at these, so some of these are just teaching the individual just to shrug the barbell powerfully to get them used to doing that, okay? Because when you're doing the technique, you want to keep the barbell moving in a straight line. A lot of times what a lot of Olympic lifts end up becoming, I call it the power reverse curl. So if you're seeing people kind of taking the barbell out in an arc to kind of, say for instance, when they're doing a clean, they bring the barbell up into an arc and have it end up. They're really not supposed to do that. When you watch somebody do an Olympic lift from the side, the barbell should move in a straight line. So you shrug the barbell as high as you can and use as much powerful hip extension. So these variations here actually go through and show you different ways to incorporate shrugging the barbell powerfully, but then also starting to utilize some powerful extension from the hip. So really the primary driver, even in the case of a muscle lift, it's still powerful hip extension that should really be driving the lift. Okay, in the muscle variation, the upper body will work a little bit harder because you're not going to be able to get that knee bend, and you really have to get the barbell up high in order to complete the lift. But if you look here, so just an isometric shrug, so just doing a shrug and holding for time, a dynamic shrug for mid-thigh, so that's just, doing repetitions with a shrug, power shrug from just above the knee. So what you'll do is you'll kind of dip a little bit, so kind of initiate that scoop phase or transition phase that you see in the technique listing from in the textbook, and then just initiate a shrug. So in other words, what you do is you'll pop your hips up and shrug at the same time. Power shrug jump, initiating a little bit of a jump with it, and then going to the power clean from the hang. Okay, so this is just one example of a dynamic progression that you can use to teach somebody who's initially starting the Olympic lifts. And here's some other pull variations. Okay, so the power pull and the high pull. So power pull versus the high pull. So the power pull is basically, it's essentially like it's basically the dynamic shrug, but just incorporating the hip movement. So you're actually kind of initiating what would essentially be the second pull phase of the Olympic lifts when you're doing it. Whereas with the high pull, you're starting to bring the arms into a little bit more, and the barbell ends higher. So I would say the primary difference between the power pull and the high pull is in the high pull, you're actually going to pull the barbell up higher. The barbell kind of comes up almost to like your, the level of your, somewhere between your chest and your chin, whereas the power pull, the barbell doesn't really come up that high. It's just basically you're just shrugging while you're initiating that hip extension. So both of these can kind of be incorporated as a part of that progression as well. And then here's some other variations. And again, where you would put these in would be based upon the level of preparation that the individual has and how much time they've actually spent doing it. So you can do power cleans from the floor with iso holds. So all that basically means is, so you're initiating the lift from the floor, and as you're coming up, what you're actually doing is pausing at different points. Okay, what that does is, again, it teaches individuals to generate more force. So one of the things that when people tend to get very good at cleans, obviously the barbell does have to move pretty fast. Olympic lifting is a speed strength sport. So what doing the power cleans with the iso holds do is it teaches individuals to kind of develop force through that full range of motion, because it slows the lift down a little bit. So it works a little bit more on the strength aspect of the power clean. You can attach accommodating resistance. You could attach bands to the barbell while you're doing cleans. That would obviously be something for somebody who's a little bit more advanced and has some good technique, because there's obviously going to be a little bit of change in how that feels, but that could certainly be something that could work as well. You can do a chair version of the power clean. So I believe I showed you guys the chair deadlift. You can also do a clean or a snatch off of a chair as well. And then you have you can use contrast methods with the accommodating resistance. So what some individuals like to do as a part of their training, what they'll do is they'll do a couple sets with the resistance bands on, and then take the bands off and try to work up to a new max. Because what the bands teach you to do, the bands kind of trick the nervous system. You have to have a tendency to get underneath the barbell a lot faster when you use bands. Because if you think about what happens with a band, as you come up with the weight, the bands are trying to pull the weight, the barbell back to the ground. So what it forces the lifter to do is have to get underneath the barbell much faster and then be able to stand up with it. So what some people who are into Olympic weightlifting have found is putting these bands on and doing that all within the same session plus taking them off, they can actually hit new records and variations of the clean when they do that. So the contrast methods would just be doing some sets with the band and then removing the band, then possibly working up to a heavier resistance from that perspective. So, and I'm going to try to find some videos of all of these because you can see them. Because obviously it's a little difficult to just kind of envision them if you've never seen this stuff before. So when we meet in class, I'm going to show you guys some of the videos of these lifts so you can see, and we'll talk further out about how they can be used slightly from the programming perspective. So again, make sure you look at the technique outlines in the textbook. Make sure you look at the major muscle groups that are worked with these. Obviously, there's a lot of muscles that get used in the Olympic lifts. Okay, they're multi-joint lifts, they're total body lifts. Okay, so make sure you're also reviewing that as well.